Even to this day, the Armenian Orthodox Church continues to celebrate on January 6. I'm convinced by the calculation theory because it explains why two different dates, December 25th and January 6th, became the two dominant dates. The January 6th date seems so much more random without this explanation.
The January 6th date seems so much more random without this explanation.
Eastern Orthodox tradition commemorates on January 6th the birth of Christ, the Epiphany, wedding at Cana.
For indeed the Savior was born in the 42nd year of the reign of Augustus. Christ was born 8 days before the Kalends of January.
Yeah.
First in Alexandria in the so-called Koreum.
Kori is the mother of the first incarnation of Dionysus. Kori is Persephone.
Right.
That's the baby Zagreus. The type of stuff we find in the PGM, where Abraxas Yao Saboeth is right next to Osiris. What the hell's going on there?
Yeah.
That's heresy. Pliny the Elder mentions what's called the Theodosia, the God's gift day. Now, he mentions the same fountain miracle, where there's a fountain of water that turns into wine, as we've mentioned in 5 other sources.
Yep.
But he says this happens in the city of Andros, and he says it happens on the none of Janus, which is either on the 5th to the 7th of January.
Well, it's Christmas time, and I'm from Buffalo, so I'm used to white Christmases, but looks like we're not having that down here. It is like spring, summer weather right now.
Shorts and a t-shirt early morning.
Yeah, I'm sweating right now. I'm doing a little walks around here, so, you know, it feels good. I can get used to this, though. I think I could handle the green Christmases.
Yeah.
But you know what? Every year around this time, on the internet, you get 2 types of content regarding Christmas, the origins of Christmas. In my opinion, both equally wrong. The first one that everyone notices is these memes that go around. So they're sort of zeitgeist-style memes where all of these gods, every god that exists, Krishna, Mithras, Jesus, Horus, Dionysus, all of them are born on December 25th by a virgin in a manger. They all have some sort of magi that shows up to them. It's like plagiarism style.
Right.
And there's just no evidence of this.
Right.
You and I have both looked into this in depth. Then there's the other side of the discussion, the Michael Joneses, the apologetics, where Christmas is completely and utterly pure and undefiled by any local traditions, such as the pagan religions.
The typical 2 extremes. Let's isolate Christianity from the rest of the known world's cults and their practices, festivities, and such, and avoid those parallels. And then you have those who parallel so much that you almost have this single story. Everything is one story, really one God, and you're just getting different names and different examples of that exact parallel, which is like the extreme version of zeitgeist. And that's not the case.
And if you're going to find parallels, get to the primary sources, be able to back it up. For example, there is some truth to some ideas that some of these gods were born around or at the solstice. For example, Plutarch, in his On Isis and Osiris, states that Harpocrates, which in Greek means Horus the child, was born around the winter solstice.
Right.
That is a contemporary source of the Gospels before the tradition of the winter solstice birth of Christ ever came into fruition, which is the 3rd century calculation theory,
right,
which Peter Nothaf greatly points out. And a lot of people cite Peter Nothaf as if it's the end-all, be-all, the calculation theory that the Christians calculated Christmas from the spring equinox when he died on the cross, 9 months gestation period, and there was some sort of cosmological perfection going on with the birth of Christ. But it's like, what about before the 3rd century calculation when that took place? You have temples in Egypt from the Bronze Age, Iron Age, that have the sun sets on the winter solstice on an altar.
Yes.
I'm showing it on the screen right now. So they designed their temples to promote and glorify the winter solstice. This was obviously a very important day for many traditions across the board.
No doubt. And I think this is a very interesting observation that you and I are trying to do with no apologetics, no defense. Yes, every cult, just to put it point blank, every cult is unique. Every single cult is unique, and every cult is similar in many ways. They have a lot in common. So apologetics wants to find those differences and therefore isolate it from having any influence or potentially even being inspired by the well-known established stuff. As we're going to dive into this video, you're going to see undeniable evidence to suggest that maybe the holidays of Christmas and the birth of Christ, the Epiphany, the manifestation of a deity in those mythic narratives that are found in our New Testament Gospels may have found inspiration from the greatest god in the Greco-Roman period that tragedies left and right were made out of. I mean, this guy was the reason for suffering and for life, for death and life. I mean, he is everything that boils down to that for that ancient world. And he's beyond just Greek. This guy was said to come from the East. There's so much more to him. And I want to just say one thing, that there are scholars who are very balanced. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those academics that we actually...
Good point, because on one side, you have the Michael Jones aspiring philosophy types, where there can't be any influences by any local traditions. Christianity is undefiled by pagans. It is pure. Their Christmas is their own creation, and nobody can say any otherwise. Despite there being the similar giving out gifts and decorating your houses a great during the month of December, which the Romans did in Saturnalia. They had a king of Saturnalia, where they had this thing where they had the poor person become king for the day, which you find in Germanic medieval sources.
Reversal of the societal norms.
And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got the Jordan Maxwell types. They're all plagiarizing with each other.
Yeah.
But you mentioned there are really good balanced approaches to this topic, and every year around this time, and I look forward to whatever he has this year, is Religion for Breakfast.
Yep.
Dr. Andrew Hendry. And I got some Q videos for him. He's got a balanced approach. Let's check out a couple clips real quick.
Every year around Christmas, Sol Invictus is brought out as an example of how Christians tried to conform their new religion to the pagan landscape of the Roman Empire. As one version of the argument goes, Sol's birthday was celebrated on December 25th, thus Christian authorities mandated that Jesus' birthday would also be celebrated on December 25th, perhaps in an effort to co-opt an already popular pagan festival day for themselves, either to directly compete against the cult of Sol Invictus, or perhaps as a conversion or proselytizing strategy. Different motivations are put forth. You also have an anonymous, probably 4th century Christian homily on the solstices and equinoxes that mentions December 25th as Sol Invictus' birthday. This evidence demonstrates that at least in the 4th century, and possibly starting in the late 3rd century under Emperor Aurelian, some Romans recognized December 25th as the birthday of the sun god, and that it was marked with some sort of festival. It's also evidence that Christians were aware of this day's association with the sun god. But is that enough evidence to support the history of religion's theory, that Christians consciously and intentionally aimed to substitute the sun god day for Jesus? I don't think this theory is supported. We don't have any Christian authority saying that they chose December 25th as Jesus' birthday to compete with Sol Invictus. Thus, it's an argument from silence. This idea does not pop up until the 1100s from a hostile Christian source named Barsalibi, who was trying to prove his January 6th Christmas as superior to the December 25th Christmas. Instead, what we do have is a wealth of documents attesting to the fact that Christians cared a lot about cosmic symbolism and calculated the major milestones of Jesus' life in such a way that places these life moments in a cosmic system, between the bookends of the spring equinox and the winter solstice. I won't say that the history of religion's theory and the calculation theory are mutually exclusive, though. I think it's possible to hypothesize some sort of hybrid theory. The Roman Empire was a huge place with millions of people, and it's very plausible that some Christian authority somewhere was very concerned about someone in his parish attending one of those chariot races in honor of Sol Invictus at the Circus Maximus. I'll admit that this is very plausible.
Holy spokes. Okay, so I love this guy. I love his balance, and you know what? I did one even better, and that was I wrote him in light of this conversation and this Christmas coming up and said, hey, I think me and Neil have really noticed something. Now, scholars have noticed this, classicists specifically, but trying to connect the dots on this particular day that we're going to deal with, the birth of Christ, the Epiphany of Christ, and the Epiphany of Dionysus, you know what his response was? Of course, no! Christianity is unique, and there's no connection to these pagan holidays. Far from it.
Right.
He said, wow, let me check these sources out myself and see what these scholars are saying and give it an evaluation. I probably will do a video covering this.
Yeah, he said it's worth doing a video on this.
Yeah.
This is something that's worth doing a video on. And it's like, hey, isn't that something? There's the good academics, they listen to arguments and evidence and what you bring forth,
Yep.
rather than look around to see if their colleagues already believe that or not.
Right.
If this is something that my colleagues taught me, if not, it must not be true. He doesn't do that. He
No.
does, this is new. This is certainly new. Oh, wow, I'm gonna look into this. This is something to, that's the type of scientific mindset that you can't help but to just adore.
I love it, and I hope more people carry that attitude and consider, with the evidence, whether they're persuaded or not, that it should be seriously taken as something that needs to be evaluated. And that's what we're going to see here. And I hope that everybody enjoys what we discuss on this issue, because there's much, much more.
Well, we got a special Christmas special for you regarding the birth of Christmas, the origins of Christmas. You are about to attain true gnosis.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And as you can see, we have our festive designer clothes from the Phrygians themselves. I wonder if the ancient Greeks thought that Phrygians were making designer clothes with the Phrygian cap. They could have
Maybe.
called it something like that, or they thought of it as something like that.
You and I saw the Phrygian cap literally in the neighboring city of Nazareth on the mosaic.
On the mosaic.
So, like,
They thought of the Easterns in general as people that wore Phrygian caps. So that's interesting. The Romans definitely did that. Now, I have to start this video off to get everyone on the same page as us as far as the birthday of Christ. This is a Christmas video. This is a Christmas special on Gnostic Informant. And you might have saw my Christmas special last year. This is going to touch on a lot of those very same topics. We're going even deeper. We have more evidence, more sources. Now, everyone talks about Christmas and they say December 25th. It doesn't have anything to do with paganism. The winter solstice used to be on December 25th. The Roman calendars before the Gregorian calendar, the Julian calendar, certainly marked December 25th as the winter solstice. So, okay, that's interesting. And then people say, what about Sol Invictus and Mithras? And what about all this other stuff? We're coming here today and saying, forget about all that. Forget about December 25th.
Right.
That is secondary compared to what we've come across. And that is that the oldest mention of the birth of Christ isn't even on December 25th.
no.
It's on January 6th.
Right. And Andrew Henry, our friend,
Our good
who is
friend.
a scholar.
Great
who's
scholar. I watch all his videos. I learned so much.
No
Him and
doubt.
Esoterica are the top two.
Bingo.
You and I are the up and comers.
We're the up-and-comers, but here's the thing. They're both PhDs.
They're
whereas
both
you and
PhDs.
me, I think, have a different groundhog effect.
Yeah.
They have a groundhog, as Dennis McDonald, for those who don't know. I'm giving a little inside language. We speak our own little code here, Neil.
Yeah.
The groundhogs are people who dig into the earth, and they come out, and there's these foxes named Neil and Derek who run around and gather information from these people who found these little riches deep in the earth, and then we run and tell other groundhogs, but also tell all the other foxes and the squirrels and the birds and everyone else, look what the groundhogs found, okay?
Yeah.
The thing is that's happened over time between you and me is we've transformed. We're like the Egyptian, iconography. We have now become groundhog-headed foxes, and we do a little research ourselves. And so you and I both watched the recent thing where Andrew Henry was mentioning.
One of them is a long time ago, from 8 years ago.
Yep.
Then he touched on it again 4 years ago.
Right.
And then he's recently made other videos on Christmas. He's very famous for this Christmas thing. And I think he's I just want to say off the bat, I love his approach.
Yeah.
He's very balanced. He's not just saying, oh, the calculation theory is true, and therefore the history of religious people are all dumbasses.
No.
He's not doing that. He's going, look, I think there's probably truth to both of them.
Right.
So I'm going to play this little two-part clip real quick, and let's discuss it.
My biggest problem with the pagan origins theory of a December 25th Christmas is that the church authorities chose the date. That they somehow had the power and the political wherewithal to say, all right, everyone, today we are worshiping Jesus and not Saturn. So we should be really careful to assume that it was the bishops deciding on December 25th as Jesus' day of birth. If anything, they were responding to a popular majority that was already celebrating it on December 25th, rather than dictating that day as the official day of Jesus' birth. Now, my second problem with the pagan origins theory is even more serious. Half of Christianity back then didn't celebrate Christmas on December 25th. Christians living in the Eastern Empire, especially in Asia Minor and Egypt, celebrated Christmas on January 6th. In fact, the Armenian Church of today still celebrates Christmas on January 6th. But there's no Saturnalia or Sol Invictus festival to blame January 6th, so we need another explanation. January 6th was celebrated mostly in Egypt and Asia, but eventually lost out to December 25th in popularity. But even to this day, the Armenian Orthodox Church continues to celebrate on January 6th. I'm convinced by the calculation theory because it explains why two different dates, December 25th and January 6th, became the two dominant dates. The January 6th date seems so much more random without this explanation, because it's nowhere near the Saturnalia or Sol Invictus festivals to blame any attempt to Christianize those holidays. But I do think there may be some overlap between these two theories. Namely, Christians do seem to think equinoxes and solstices were involved somehow with Jesus' birth and death. According to the Roman Julian calendar, December 25th was the winter solstice. According to that same calendar, March 25th was the spring equinox. It's possible that December 25th won out over January 6th because Christians were trying to align Jesus' death and birth with days that were already widely recognized and celebrated as important. In fact, the Sol Invictus festival probably did the same thing. The cult of Sol Invictus was popular among Roman emperors, such as Aurelian, and the ancient historian Gaston Halsberg hypothesizes that the Romans saw this as the sun's birthday because it was one of the most dramatic moments in the sun's course. It makes a lot of sense to put a solar holiday on the shortest day of the year when every following day would be longer and longer. So I would modify the Christianization theory as an attempt to ascribe Christian significance to the winter solstice, rather than an attempt to specifically Christianize Saturnalia or Sol Invictus. Whether you were worshipping Saturn, Sol, or Jesus though, there was a deeply entrenched habit to celebrate something in late December, and that habit didn't simply die off. Macrobius was writing in the 5th century CE, well into the Christian period when December 25th was becoming the most popular day to celebrate Christmas. So we can reconstruct December in the late Roman Empire as a time of multiple festivals, which possibly involves some level of religious syncretism and competition around the winter solstice.
The January 6th date seems so much more random without this explanation. Because
he left it off saying that January 6th is random. It's too random.
Right.
Therefore, the calculation theory has to be true.
Right.
Now,
And
if that's true, that January 6th is so random that there's a calculation happening, then he'd be correct. However, is January 6th random?
it is not random. And let me just say
anyone
this.
who watches you and me already know what we're about to do.
This is so important because this did not start as a Christmas research. I called you, Neil, and I said,
not at
hey,
all.
Neil, listen, man, we're trying to up and coming, do our new documentaries. And I said, I got to do a video. I found a claim in an apologetics conference by Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy, who stated that there is no myth of Dionysus transforming water into wine any earlier than the 3rd century AD.
So sometimes they'll bring up Dionysus and they'll say Dionysus turned water into wine. Yeah, that comes from a 3rd century text. Postdates the New Testament. Shut up.
It's postdates the New Testament, his words, not mine. Shut up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know me. I got to check that.
He said shut up, too.
He did. He literally said shut up.
How stupid do you look when you tell someone to shut up because you think you're right about something? And in fact, you're not even wrong. You're wrong. There's about 10 primary sources that show that you're wrong.
There's so much that we found that you and I started digging into. And one of the things we need to nail, we're going to get into other things about Dionysus, and there's no way we're going to cover everything. But one of the things we need to nail is the source that mentions this date.
Right.
And that is in Pliny the Elder.
Yes. What I want to do before I talk about Pliny the Elder is I want to do a little rundown on the sources that show Dionysus and wine miracles.
Okay.
And how this ties into January 6th is very shocking. You and I ran into this. We weren't looking for this.
No, we weren't.
We ran into this and go, holy shit.
Yep.
This isn't even in any of my videos yet. This is coming out today. I think you might have a video out by now.
I do. Yeah. By now, I imagine it's been a couple days.
We're putting our notes together. And first of all, Dionysus is so old. He shows up in Linear B. And even back in the Linear B, by the way, anyone who doesn't know what Linear B is, it's the pre-Greek writing system from the Bronze Age.
Before
late
the
Bronze Age.
alphabet of the Phoenicians, period.
Before the Phoenicians, yeah. And Dionysus' name shows up in Linear B in multiple places, and in one of the spots, it's associated with wine offerings.
Yep.
Okay. Homer mentions Dionysus in a wine sense, where he's given wine offerings.
It's an unmixed wine
Yeah.
with the ashes of Achilles. So
Yes.
this is significant.
Yeah. Now, in the Homeric hymn, though,
Yeah.
he specifically causes miracles, not just with wine and grapes, but with like vines and berries and vegetation and like apples and all types of fruits that just spring up and swelling.
The even the boat itself gives off, not only does the wine fill the boat,
Yeah.
the aroma of the sweet fragrance of wine, the humans transform into dolphins.
This is in a
He
Homeric hymn.
transforms into an animal, he is beyond wine.
But the reason why I want to highlight this is it shows that Dionysus is a life-giving
Yes.
god. He's a god of growing of vegetation, the swelling of the fruits. He is the life god. He's the god that gives life. He can heal. He can touch the dead ground with just dirt and soil. That soil could turn into green, luscious plants.
Notice he turns
Jesus is depicted like this.
A black wooden boat
Yeah.
starts to give off the branches of vines.
Yeah, I
okay?
noticed that in some of the movies about Jesus, The Chosen, for example, it shows him walking in the desert, and there's like plants growing behind him.
Yeah.
That's Dionysian,
Right.
And that might not have been on purpose, but I'm just saying Jesus is
It's
almost
also Osirian, but you
it's
know
Syrian.
that. That's a whole other video.
That's another video I got coming out as well.
Yep.
All right, so we're just laying out what Dionysus is, but here's where things start to get crazy. In the 4th century BCE, we have two sources. One of them is a fragment from Theopompus, where he mentions Elis in the city of Elis. The priests take 3 empty vessels, and they seal them up in the temple, and they come back on the appointed dates, it says, and the jars are miraculously filled with wine.
Right.
Aristotle, also in the 4th century BCE, echoes the same exact story about the same city in Elis. And remember Elis. This is important. This is going to tie into January 6th.
And the day. There's no date mentioned. That's the only unfortunate
Right now, we don't
thing.
have any dates mentioned.
Right, but we
have
do have a day. They are saying in these sources, there's a day. There is a day. There is a day, but it doesn't tell us the day.
It's an appointed day. It's a holiday.
What is this day?
And there's, these two sources so far don't say.
Right.
However, Diodorus of Sicily, in around 50, middle of the 1st century BCE, he gives a similar story. He mentions Elis again, so it's the same tradition. He mentions the city of Teos. Now we have another city this time, and Naxos. So now we know it's not just happening in one city. Now we know that this is a tradition that's widespread.
Right.
Okay? He mentions Elis, Teos, and Naxos. This time, he doesn't just talk about a wine miracle. He says there's a fountain of wine that once a year turns into fountain of water. I'm sorry, water turns into wine.
Right.
On the day of the birth of Dionysus, when Dionysus is infant. Do you have the source?
I believe I do. Now, these accounts of the birth of Dionysus are generally agreed upon by the ancient writers, but rival claims are raised by not a few Greek cities to having been the place of his birth. The peoples of Elis and Naxos, for instance, and the inhabitants of the Eleutherae and Teos and several other peoples state that he was born in their cities. The Teans advance as proof that the god was born among them the fact that even to this day, at fixed times in their city, a fountain of wine of unusually sweet fragrance flows of its own accord from the earth. Now, this mentions him being born in these specific cities, but there's another account, and this is actually in Plutarch, I believe, who is actually saying that at the birth, the nymphs wash and bathe him in the water. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves here.
Well, I was going to get to Plutarch. I also have on my list Seneca.
Yep.
So in the 1st century of this Common Era, during the reign of Nero, Seneca, that's when Seneca was in his prime, Seneca mentions a wedding in which Dionysus is with his mother, Can you? This is another
Yes.
one another one I want to read too. I promise. I know we're throwing a lot at you. I swear we'll tie it all
You
together.
need to, like, really
just follow along
yeah.
and you don't have to write all this down and memorize it. I promise you, this all matters.
I also give a little commentary of what's being said here. If you want, I can give that.
Yes,
But
yes.
sacred Catherion flowed with blood from Ophion's slaughter, which is an actual sacrifice. Protetes sought the forest, and Argos honored Bacchus, which is Dionysus, for anyone who doesn't know, in the presence of his stepmother, Naxos, adorned by the Aegean Sea, gave the abandoned...
There's the city again, the same city that's mentioned by Diodorus.
Right, the birth.
So this is the city where he's born in, or his birth is celebrated, according to Diodorus.
Yep. Adorned by the Aegean Sea, gave the abandoned virgin to the marriage bed, compensating the loss with a better husband. The Nystalian stream flowed from the dry pumice stone. Chattering streams cut through the grass, and the high ground drank the sweet juices. Wine.
There it is.
Pure fountains of white milk, just like Euripides describes. And lesbian thyme mixed with the fragrant herbs. The new bride is led to visit the heavens, to the vast heavens, sorry. Phoebus, which is really Apollo, sings the solemn hymn with his hair falling on his shoulders and twin cupids shake their torches. Jupiter, Zeus, laid down his fiery weapon and hated the thunderbolt with Bacchus arriving. So Bacchus is such a good...
Yeah, this is echoed in Nonus's later Dionysica.
Yep.
This is the Epiphany.
This is
the coming of the child god Dionysus.
Yep.
It mentions the same city that Diodorus mentions, who talks about the child Dionysus is born.
Yep.
It mentions the same fountain that pours out and turns into wine once a year.
Right.
So this is clearly a tradition.
Yep.
These aren't separate. There's so much in common so far that you can't say these are all separate random things. This is a tradition. They all have so much. They all have a fountain in common, jars and turn into wine, and a birthday, and either the city of Elis, Naxos, or Teos. That's all we know so far.
And there's other cities they say, but they don't really name all of them.
Yes.
But in this it says...
Pliny calls it the Theodosia.
Yes.
But yeah.
That's that source you were getting at.
Yeah, that's the one I want to get into next, yeah.
Yeah, just to finish this up, it says, as long as the bright stars of the aged universe run their course, as long as ocean surrounds the enclosed world with waves, as long as the full moon gathers the scattered lights, as long as Lucifer foretells the morning's rise, and the deep blue Nereus does not know the high Arctic, we will revere the fair face of beautiful Laius Bacchus.
Wow. Now we're going. If you've been paying attention, we've been going in chronological order from the beginning to time. So now we're in the 1st century. The next source that mentions the birth of Dionysus or some sort of wine miracle is Pliny the Elder, not the younger, not the 2nd century writer. Pliny the Elder, who wrote this, he died in 79 CE AD. Right. So this is before that. This is before the Gospels. Yep. If Mark would have written in 70, then we highly doubt that he would have found... by the way, the wine miracles are in John anyway. So it doesn't matter. This is before John.
Right.
Okay. Pliny the Elder mentions what's called the Theodosia, God's gift day. Now, he mentions the same fountain miracle, where there's a fountain of water that turns into wine, as we've mentioned in 5 other sources.
Yep.
But he says this happens in the city of Andros, and he says it happens on the none of Janus, which is either on the 5th to the 7th of January. This is the January, and by the way, we're going to get to this, but some of the Christian authors talk about the January 6th start actually being the day of they worship the birth, but they start readings on the 5th.
Yes, the night of.
Yeah, so he talks about this being a 7-day festival.
Right.
Starting on the 5th of January, going all the way through the week.
Yep.
So we have a birth of Dionysus on arguably the same day as Jesus, January 6th, January 5th, if you want to get super technical on when the none. Because the none is a word they use. It's like Kalends, or the Ides of March is in the middle of the month. The Kalends is towards the end. The none is the beginning. It's after the first week is over. So it can be the 5th, it can be the 6th day, it can be the 7th day of the month.
Right.
It could be any of those days. So he doesn't say January 6th or January 5th. He says None of Janus. So we have it smack dab in the same time of the year. We have a birthday, an Epiphany festival, with a wine miracle happening, with water turning into wine, literally water turning into wine.
Literally fountains or springs of water that are in consecrated temples.
Right.
So these are important fountains that on certain days of the year, these special god days when the Epiphany and presence of Dionysus shows up.
Right. But now I want to make sure, there's a couple more too. And before I even get to that, this is the first time we actually get a date. The other ones mention his birth. The other ones mention these cities, either Elis, Naxos, or Andros, or Teos. Mm-hmm. And they all mention a similar wine miracle, whether it's fountains that turn into wine or 3 vessels, empty vessels, being turned into wine. But this one gives a date. But it makes me assume that this, because of these are so similar in their traditions and in their attributes of what's happening, that I have to think that these are all happening on the same day.
Well, I think you're right. And let me give a little backup, right? We can't
I can't know for sure.
In a court of law, a judge might look at this and go, you got a case.
You got a case, yeah.
But if I were to look, for example, a pseudo-Apollodorus, right? We were talking about Ovid before we went recording. We weren't going to get into the myth mainly because in it, he gifts the daughters of one of these rulers during the Trojan War, before the Trojan War. The daughters are gifted with the ability to transform things into wine, into grain, into oils, all this stuff, right? Well, pseudo-Apollodorus does the same thing, but he doesn't mention all the account. It's similar, but it's not identical. There's no reason to think they're not harping in the same vein of tradition.
It's the same tradition, right?
Same tradition.
But that's why I was going to say Pausanias, right after Pliny the Elder. Pausanias mentions the Elis, the 3 vessels thing again.
3 vessels.
And then he uses the same Theodosia thing that we get from Pliny.
This is
why Pausanias is such a big deal.
Yeah.
He's contemporary with the Gospels. He might be right before John was written. Right. He's early 2nd century. John's probably just being written when Pausanias is writing. He mentions the same 3 vessels in the same city Elis that we got from the oldest source and Aristotle from the 4th century BC, going back to the older tradition. Mm-hmm. Same city Elis, same 3 vessels, but Theodosia, which is what Pliny the Elder called it, for the day of his birth at the None of January 6th. Right. Why would you call a different day of the year? Would you call a different day? Would you call March 17th Christmas if there's only one Christmas? Right. There's not 2 Theodosias. Would you really think there's 2 Theodosias that happen the same wine miracle dedicated to Dionysus? Makes me think that every single thing that I just mentioned is all on January 5th to 6th.
Right. I don't know if because for example, we brought up the source about the marriage on the island and stuff. You and I were talking about beforehand.
Talking about Seneca?
Yeah. Well, it could be because it's the same island.
Mention the wine. Seneca mentions the fountain, though.
Right, and so the region of Naxos.
The fountain tradition, and it's one of the same cities, which means he's anchored in this tradition to some degree.
Right. I'm just
when you put them all together, you can see the big picture of one tradition here.
Right. No matter how you slice this, it is so significant to realize how confrontational the Dionysian cult would have been for a new cult on the rise. That you literally mock or imitate, I don't mean mock in the derogatory, but you actually are imitating Dionysus with Jesus turning water into wine at a wedding in Cana. We read the wedding of the Virgin, and all this wine starts to flourish from the earth on that island that was mentioned, right? Yeah. That is equivalent to the same day in similar Teos traditions and stuff like that. So I see what you're saying.
Right,
I
but
agree.
There's a reason why all this is going to matter when it gets to Christianity, but there's also one more that I want to mention. Plutarch talks also in the late 1st, early 2nd century. I think he was born in 46 CE. I think he died around 120 or something like that. He talks about, this was another one I wanted to read actually.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, can you pull this one up? This is another spring water spring miracle turning into wine, but this one also mentions the birth. So it ties it once again. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the 8th one.
Yeah.
That either have some sort of fountain or spring turning into wine. Either they call it Theodosia or it's in one of these cities that I mentioned.
Yep.
And then Plutarch seems to be adding to this tradition.
This is and keep in mind, Plutarch is writing this at the end of the first, early second. I mean, this is before the Gospels are even known.
Circulating. Yeah.
Even just to emphasize our point, we brought up Pliny the Elder. Someone might not realize this, but Pliny the Younger, there's a text from him crying out to the emperor, "Who are these Christians? I don't even know what to do with these people. Who are they?"
You think if his dad knew about Christianity, you think he would?
Yes, especially if they were significant at all.
Right.
But he doesn't know, and he's asking the emperor, "What do I do with these people I've never heard of and don't know what to do?"
Is his father of Pliny the Younger.
So this is an important point to bring up about Plutarch and Pliny the Elder. They're writing at a time when Christians are truly insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And so I would even argue, so is Pausanias, who's writing in the 160s, 170s. Here's the interesting part about that. One more point is this. Justin Martyr, when he talks about the Logos, he could have easily quoted the Gospel of John. He never mentions the Gospel of John. 150s, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Why? That doesn't prove the Gospel of John isn't there and is maybe insignificant, but
Pausanias doesn't know about it.
He doesn't know about it. There's no doubt in my mind. So here we are reading Plutarch, right? And he says, "But those of the Thebans..."
That's the city. So now we have another city added here. But I'm not surprised that Thebes would be tossed in the mix, because Thebes is where the Bacchae takes place.
If anything, this tells me, look at how grand and wide this cult.
Now we have
what, 4 or 5 different regions?
We didn't even talk about Scythopolis.
No, that's next.
That's okay.
That's next.
But we have Elis, Teos, Naxos, Andros, Thebes.
And Thebes, he says, who had remained outside. But those of the Thebans who had remained outside, taking the city on their left, advanced upon the rear of their enemy at the spring called Kisusa.
It's Kisusa. Yeah.
Here, as the story goes, his nurses bathed the infant Dionysus after his birth. This is a birth.
So we have a baby Dionysus.
For the water has the color and sparkle
there we go.
of wine.
There we have the same tradition.
Is clear and very pleasant to the taste. Lysander 28:4.
So, okay. 1, 2, 3 of these mention 3 empty vessels being brought in by priests.
Yep.
5 of them mention a spring or fountain of water transforming from water into wine.
For in you brought up Pausanias. I think in Pausanias he says, and one of these sources, I got so many of them, 7 days out of the year, each year, he says this. It's Pausanias, because I remember, because he's the one who goes, if the Greeks are to be believed, then we might as well take the accounts of the Ethiopians on the table of the sun.
Right.
So he says, for 7 days out of the year, this fountain that normally runs its course every day. Water. Then the Epiphany, the presence of Dionysus comes. They end up in the presence of it, and it's wine for 7 days. But if you take the wine out of the presence of the precinct of the temple, the presence of that god, the wine turns back into water, tasting like water again.
Right. So, okay.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah. So out of these eight amazing primary sources, 5 of them have something to do with a fountain or a spring that goes from water into wine during the birth of baby Dionysus. And the other 3 sources talk about priests in the city of Elis that take 3 vessels that are empty and they turn them into wine. But they all have this in common. They all have some sort of wine miracle in common. Mm-hmm. And the only date that we're given in connection to these 8 sources is the night of January 5th into the 6th.
Right.
So that's what we have right now.
That's significant that someone...
and 2 of them are titled the Theodosia.
Theodosia, that's a significant holy day, and it's a date. And here's what's so significant about this to me. Musonius, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly. He was 3-time consul of Vespasian. He was the one reported this to Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder says, under the account of trustworthy Musonius, 3-time consul says this about this fountain.
Yeah.
Dude, if you don't think Christians are reading this and knowing what the head honchos of their society are saying, and they don't think they need to model, imitate, and compete with, you're missing the rise of Christianity. You're missing the point.
And I don't think January 6th is random, as Andrew said.
No.
But I also want to point out another thing about the birth of Dionysus that's very fascinating. In Homer, going back to Homer, he says that Dionysus was born on Mount Nysa, which and he says word for word, the tall mountain beyond Phoenicia near Egypt streams.
Dude.
And that's like, wait a minute. That's either the only two places that are in between. Well, I guess you could call it Edom. The only three places that are in between Phoenicia and Egypt streams is Sinai, Judea, or Edom, Midian, or whatever. We're talking the Holy Land. That's where Homer says that Dionysus was born.
Right.
But we have a better source about Scythopolis, also known as Beth. So we think, where was Jesus born? Well, he's from the Galilee. He's from the north, but he was born in Bethlehem.
Right.
But what about Beth Shean?
So I want to say something before we even get to this, because this is so fun. I can't tell you how much fun.
I'm saving Epiphanius for last.
Yes, save. This is so important. There's so much I want to draw the pictures.
We have
build
more
up.
January 6th. That wasn't the only January 6th source.
Right.
There's more. Go ahead.
So as you're talking about this region that we're going to get into, when scholars are looking at the Gospels, or they're trying to understand what they're doing, when Rudolf Bultmann, way back, figured it's not way back, but he's a well-known, profound 20th century scholar who wrote, let me say that again. Rudolf Bultmann, who wrote his commentary dealing with the Gospel of John, he has highlighted the significant legendary development that they see in John with the water into wine at the wedding of Cana with Jesus and Dionysus. It wasn't just him. There are several other scholars who echo they first hunted for Jewish antecedents. I know it's taboo to go against that. You have to start there. And guess what? I agree. Go for it. See what you can find. They can't find anything. They looked. There's nothing even significantly close to what we see with the wedding at Cana, transforming water into wine in these vessels. But there's so much on Dionysus, he couldn't ignore it. So he was honest. And he said, looks like they're riffing off of Dionysus. So scholars have asked, where did John write? What significance would this gospel have had, and who is his audience? Well, it seems to be when it constantly accused the Jews at large, and he uses this kind of language that sounds like he's talking to a Gentile audience, that it's predominantly not a Jewish audience, it's a Gentile audience.
Yeah, he's talking about the logos as the beginning. That's Pythagorean.
But so did Philo.
Yeah.
So
who's a Platonist?
Who's very, very, yeah. I just want to make the point that there's a huge emphasis on where.
Philo's not read by rabbinic Jews.
Right,
they don't like Philo.
Right. That's
Christians read Philo.
Yeah, Christians read.
He's a proto-Christian.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I just wanted to say that as I've come across a few sources where they're like, hold on, maybe John is actually writing to a people that this would have been significant, and they were part of a region where Dionysian cults were located. But it gets even more juicy as you and I have been digging in. So
this is big.
This is huge. What if I told you that Nyssa was in Palestine?
Not even Palestine. Nazareth,
18 miles
the
southeast from Nazareth.
Right.
Okay, we're talking.
You can walk there in one day. You can walk from Jesus's, where he grew up, to the birth of Dionysus.
The place.
Tell the source.
Oh, okay. So let me just read you. So it's on a website in case you're wanting to go look it up yourself. You can link the website. I can send you the link after this. But so the presence of Dionysus veneration in Palestine is important because John was probably from there. As evidence, scholars point to his unmistaken familiarity with the geography, especially in Jerusalem. Thus, he mentions Jacob's well in Samaria. We remember the woman at the well, the Siloam pool, and the Sheep Gate pool. John also takes care to translate Hebrew and Aramaic words. I'm not going to read all that. Prior to the success of Christianity, Dionysus veneration was probably the strongest form of individual piety in the Eastern Roman Empire. There are sources for all of this. Dionysus had already been a religious factor in Palestine for centuries, especially among the Hellenized parts of the population. This is not surprising, since the wine industry was a staple of the local economy. Vine, grapes, and drinking cups appeared on Jewish reliefs and on coins. Images of Dionysus himself appeared on coins minted in Damascus, Scythopolis, which we're going to get into, and I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Scythopolis, Raphia, Caesarea, Elia, and perhaps Philadelphia, modern Ammon. So after Alexander the Great, here's the significance of this. After Alexander the Great conquered the East, the Galilean city of Beth Shean, you and me were there. Okay,
Beth Shean,
you could show them. Here's the video. Okay, you're watching this. only about 18 miles southeast of Nazareth, was made a polis, a city-state, and its name was changed to Scythopolis in honor of the Scythian guards who, according to the myths, Dionysus took with him on his expedition to India, which myth Alexander the Great later emulated. That means this is way back, like you said, in Homer.
Yeah, in Arian's telling of the story of Alexander the Great, he talks about Alexander going all the way to the east, and he finds ivy growing on the side of a mountain, and he's like, Dionysus was here. This is where he fought his wars. And all of his, Arian says they all don the ivy wreaths on their heads, and they start going into Bacchic frenzies and start going crazy.
Wow.
It's an amazing story.
So he emulates this earlier myth in real time.
Yeah.
According to the accounts.
Yeah.
And then settled in the city. This city.
Bethshean.
In
the Galilee.
Scythopolis. In the Galilee, in Palestine,
and it says
in Israel.
that's where Dionysus was born.
It literally goes on to say, right here, it is also known as Nysa or Nysa Scythopolis, in honor of the place where, according to the myths, Dionysus was raised by nymphs, the principal one being Nysa, whom Dionysus buried there. That's in Pliny 51 or
That's
50.
the same author who mentions the 5th and 6th of January.
Same
which
exact
is where
dude.
this is the birth of Dionysus.
The birth of Dionysus, and he's raised here by nymphs.
Yeah.
Which in one of the accounts we were reading, which was Plutarch, talks about him being dipped in the water, and the water turning into water. He's baptized.
That's what the word is. Baptized means dip.
Literally baptized.
Plutarch talks about
as an infant, the nymphs baptize him in the water, and the water transforms into wine. And it gives the fragrance and the look of wine. Yeah.
So right now we have the January 6th date popping up.
Yep.
We have a birth date possibly in Judea, in Galilee, a birth location. We have water into wine. We have baptisms. We have epiphanies. We have a lot. This is all the data is like pointing to some tradition.
For sure. It's
some
relevant.
Tradition about January 6th about Dionysus.
And it's in the region that the Gospels locate Jesus' tradition taking place.
Yes.
This is not like, okay, check this out. We're over here in Italy.
Yeah.
Here's this story of Dionysus in Italy over here at this wine turning into this. I don't give a shit about Italy. I'm saying in Nysa, in Palestine, at the freaking place where
Galilee.
Jesus is at.
Yes.
Like we should be paying attention here.
Right.
To finish off what I was saying, it was claimed that he was born at that location. If you're looking for a source, it's Koester, Koester, page 85, and founded the city in the mid-3rd century BC. Pharaoh Ptolemy Philadelphus II.
Who's the one who wrote the Septuagint?
This is there's some stuff going on,
There's
bro.
something going on here.
Something's going on here.
Go ahead.
Philadelphus II, a great proponent, pro-Dionysus hardcore.
Yeah, he started the Serapis cult.
Substantially built up the city. Archaeologists have uncovered statues and altars of Dionysus there, and you and me were there. Proving that Dionysus worship was firmly entrenched in the city, even during the 2nd century AD. So you have the Gospels being written in a time where he is the head honcho in the land near Nazareth.
Right.
You're going to tell me they're not inspired when they're crafting their narratives?
What did we see when we were in Safari?
Massive.
Sepphoris, by the
What
way.
would you call that? A cathedral type of stadium? Where massive.
They're a theater.
A theater.
Yeah.
We sat on their shitters.
There's an old 1st century theater there.
There's a whole road.
There's a house of Dionysus, a house of Orpheus, where there's a mosaic of Orpheus playing the lyre in Nazareth, in Sepphoris.
Sepphoris.
And then, which is the
same region.
It's like saying Boston and New England. It's all the same part. It's the same area. There's 2 hills. One of them's Nazareth, one of them's Sepphoris.
And that big
Sepphoris
hill
is bigger.
Play the video. Right behind you and me is the massive hill that you can go and climb up. We never climbed up it, but it's right there on film, right behind us at that location.
Beautiful spot. They have the theater. They have the house of Dionysus. They have a house of Orpheus, and that's where Jesus grew up. Now,
it even says he visited that place, literally.
You have to visit
I know.
Sepphoris.
I'm just saying the Gospels literally.
Yeah, that's the major hub of Nazareth. It'd be like growing up here in Kissimmee and not going to Orlando.
Right.
It's the same situation. All right. So what does this have to do with Christianity? Well, it turns out that January 6th is the oldest mention of the birth of Jesus. December 25th happens later. happens in the 3rd century, way late in the game. So that's why I said in the beginning of this video, who cares about Sol Invictus and Mithras and the winter solstice and Saturnalia?
I mean, there's definitely stuff.
There's something
Yeah.
to be said there, but we got to start with ground zero, and
So
that is
Clement-
January 6th.
Clement
Clement of Alexandria, he harkens back to the Basilidians. Basilides was alive in the 1st century. He was one of the students of Simon Magus. He's one of these Gnostics, right?
Right.
He is the first person on record, on any Christian record, to celebrate the birth of Jesus. What else did he do on this day?
So I'll read the source just so everybody knows we're not pulling anything out of our.
Absolutely.
But the followers of the Basilides celebrate the day of his baptism too, spending the previous night in readings. And they say that it was the 15th of the month, TB of the 15th year of Tiberius
Which
Caesar.
equates to January 6th on our time. Go ahead.
And some say that it was observed in the 11th of the same month, which is either the 6th or the 10th of January. That's the earliest.
Which is funny because this is a 7-day festival.
7 days.
6th to the 10th, like to the whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it goes on, and the interesting thing is there's another early mention of the Epiphany of Christ, right? It's a feast, by the way. It's already celebrated as a feast. That is Ammianus, Amminus Marcellinus in 361 AD, where it is listed, possibly indicating a dual celebration of Jesus' baptism and birth, which it connects the birth and the baptism.
So just like we have with the story with one of the sources about Dionysus being dipped, which is Baptist, which is literally the word in Greek to dip is to baptize. So you have baby Dionysus being baptized on his birth on January 6th, and then we have this source right here saying baby Jesus is being baptized on his birth on January 6th.
Right. Well, it's even better than
and then the January.
It goes
and then if
better.
anyone wants to like push on the January 5th thing being more literal, he says that they spend the night prior to that, the night before January 6th, January 5th, doing readings of the text.
Exactly, and some of
it's January 5th and January 6th,
right? It's the night of the eve of, if you will, right? The interesting part is some scholars suppose that the baptism and the birth may stem from a reading of Luke 3:23, which says Jesus was about 30 years old when baptized. So again, a calculation theory, if you're working within traditions that are already existent, and you see that Dionysus is in the same pool, and he does this miracle on the same day way later, but he also is born in the same region, in the same place, he's dipped at the same, like, they're already looking to go, well, Jesus was born here. Oh, but he was also baptized 30 years later.
That's right. I want to end on that. I want to say what we think was good. What do we think happened?
Got it.
But I want to first, before we even get there, because that's what I think happened.
Got it.
But before we even get there, there's other sources. Okay.
For sure. There's Epiphanius.
This
is the big one, dude.
Let's just get to the big kahuna. But before I mention Epiphanius, I just want to say something. Even to this day, Eastern Orthodox tradition commemorates on January 6th, to this very day, they commemorate the birth of Christ, the Epiphany, the wedding at Cana.
Well, that is the Epiphany too.
The Epiphany.
Yeah.
They say, and then his baptism.
Right. Which all of them in a way are his Epiphany.
Yes. But here's the thing about wedding at Cana. In one of these sources, the one that you read from Seneca, he's with his mother at a wedding. You read this.
Yeah.
He's with his mother.
Yep.
At a wedding.
And
that ties to this tradition that we were talking about. You also have them celebrating the wedding at Cana. And what happens at the wedding at Cana? Jesus turns water into wine.
Just so happens.
And it happens to be his birthday.
Right.
The birthday of Jesus, with water into wine, Epiphany, wedding with his mom.
Right.
And baptism. All the same exact traditions of Dionysus happen to fall in John's gospel.
But here's the thing. I'm going to give you pushback here, Neil. I'm going to say, do you happen to have an early Christian voice that supposedly says they're celebrating things on this day, though?
And that's one of the things that Andrew puts forth in one of his older videos. It was 8 years ago. So
no. I just think he doesn't know about the source.
Because he says in this one video, this is from 8 years ago, there are no Christians on record that mention anything about pagans doing anything on this day.
Right.
That's not true.
Yeah, but
I'm not talking crap. I think he missed this source.
Of course.
Now, this is a fourth. This is from Epiphanius, who lived in the 300s.
This is important.
But here's the thing: when we're talking about the calculation theories, we're talking about 4th and 5th and 6th century sources anyway. So this is not that late in the grand scheme of what does the evidence tell us. So Epiphanius, can you read this source?
Absolutely.
Because we have to read this source, and then we're going to discuss it.
Listen, forgive us in advance. You have to stick around for this. It's a bit long, but I'm going to read it quickly.
Yeah.
And you will emphasize.
Can you drill the major parts?
I will. It's hard to know
Read
where.
it, and if I have to clip anything,
Yeah, that's fine. All right. For indeed the Savior was born in the 42nd year of the reign of Augustus, Emperor of the Romans, during his 13th consulship, together with Silanus, as recorded in the Roman consulship. It is stated thus, quote, during their consulship, that is, the 13th of Octavius and Silanus, Christ was born 8 days before the Kalends of January.
Wait. 8 days before the Kalends of January, which would be 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29, 30, 31. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 13
So,
days.
okay, I got
so
it,
that's 13 days after the winter solstice. Exactly. So we have the 25th lining up with the
January 6th.
in this source.
They're connected by Epiphanius.
So boom.
He connects them.
By the way, is Epiphanius just a random guy?
No, this guy is
He's
an encyclopedia.
He's the successor to Eusebius. He's the
guy's no
chief
joke.
librarian of the entire Roman Empire, who has the most written books of the entire century. In the 4th century, no one's written more books than Epiphanius.
So Neil,
So he has access to, and by the way, the sources he uses in his Panarion draw back to the 1st century BC.
okay, so he's going.
He's
back.
got sources that go back that far.
Right.
And he's in the library.
So let's just say
Let's
this.
continue.
We already have a winter solstice connected to this
We have
Epiphany
January 6th and December 25th.
due to the 13 days that he mentions. But this
The
gets
12 days of Christmas. There it is.
yeah, exactly.
Ever
That's-
wonder where the 12 days of Christmas comes from?
This is
We
where it
found
comes from. Yes, and it gets even more scandalous in the source because he's not just talking about days. He starts connecting things.
Watch
this
this.
is where it gets crazy. I love this. So he says, again, Christ was born 8 days before the Kalends of January, 13 days after the winter solstice, and the addition of light and day. This day is celebrated by the Greeks. I mean,
the birth of light, the darkest day of the year is right before the winter solstice, and then light starts to rise up again.
Again, astrotheology proponents.
It's true, and he's pointing it out, not me. I'm not pointing it out.
Ancients.
I'm not doing zeitgeist. I'm just reading the
No,
source.
there's another source that describes 4 gods, and each god represents a season and stuff like.
Right.
I can't remember the exact source, but there's some stuff there.
That's Macrobius of Saturnalia,
Okay.
where he says Dionysus was born on winter solstice, and on that source. That's another source. And the reason why I didn't mention that source, because that one is way later.
Yeah, 5th century.
That's 5th century.
Right.
But in Saturnalia, a book called Saturnalia, Dionysus and Apollo are born on the winter solstice.
This is so. There's a deep tradition here.
Oh, and real quick, I know you got to finish that.
Yeah.
But it is even though that is a late source.
Yeah.
There is precedent in Plutarch. Plutarch mentions the birth of the baby Harpocrates, the holy child. Horus the child is what is the Greek way to say Harpocrates. That's what it means. He says he's born around the winter solstice.
Right. So
So we already have a tradition. And Dan McClellan says, but it says peri, around. Well, January 6th is around the winter solstice.
Right.
All I'm saying is the data's pointing to this area of the time.
Right.
It's saying something here is big for birthday.
Well, we figured out something more here, I think.
To ignore that because it says around is, I think it's not. You're not being scientific.
You're not being fair.
Yeah, you're not. You're dismissing sources that you don't like.
Or
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, or the conclusion might actually overturn something that you've been.
A lot of these scholars, they stamp their foot down on a position, and once you're known publicly for your position, and you forget some data that conflicts with that position, you're going to be like, no, get that away from me. I see it so much.
Right. That may be, I mean, I can't psychoanalyze, but that's a common theme.
That's
that
Tim
I
O'Neill
find.
all day.
So here we have. He says this day, which day? After the winter solstice, 13 days later, January the 6th, where Jesus is born and the Epiphany, the whole nine, he says, this day is celebrated by the Greeks. I mean, the idolaters.
Wait. He didn't say, the Greeks borrowed this from us.
No.
He says,
they're
the
celebrating
birthday of Jesus, which the Greeks are already celebrating.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, we need to know who they're celebrating, but okay, let's keep going. So he says, I mean the idolaters. On the 8th before the Kalends of January, which the Romans call Saturnalia, the Egyptians call Cronia, and the Alexandrians call Kikellia, whatever. For on the 8th before the Kalends of January, this division occurs, which is the solstice, and the days begin to increase as light gains addition, completing a number of 13 days up to the 8th before the Kalends of January, each day adding 30 hours up to the day of Christ's birth. As also the wise Ephraim among the Syrians testified to this word in his explanation, saying that thus was ordained the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, the birth according to the flesh, or rather the perfect incarnation, which is called Epiphany. From the beginning of
There's that Epiphany.
Yeah.
And I got something to say on that too. Oh, let me just say it right now while you're on that. A great article has already been done on this work. You and I are drawing from her work. Mm-hmm. She doesn't tie it to Christianity like we're doing now.
Right.
But Annabelle Cristobal, Anna Jimenez Cristobal is a scholar who's written an article called The Epiphany Wine Miracles of Dionysus, where she lists all these miracles that we mentioned. That's how we know we're in good company.
Yeah.
Because we have a PhD expert professor who she did work with our friend Paola Corrente. Both of them have PhDs. They wrote a book together about Dionysus.
They know about Dionysus.
They know this better than anybody. They're
Yeah.
not just random Bible scholars dipping their feet into something they don't know.
Right.
She's listed all of these sources. She mentions the Diodorus, the Pliny, the Pausanias, the Plutarch, and I think there are a couple other ones too, and Theopompus.
Yeah.
And she puts it all together, saying that this is all a tradition. So, as we hypothesis in this video, we think these traditions are connected. She got this peer-reviewed. It says it is, and it's an Epiphany tradition.
See,
She uses the same exact word that he's using. She goes, "This is an Epiphany Dionysus tradition on this day, January 6th," is what she says. And I'm showing the article on the screen right now, and the link's in the description. Please read it yourself. So that's how
Fact check us.
I just want you guys to know that we're not just throwing stuff out there that's not out there. This is peer-reviewed stuff.
Listen, I don't think people, maybe some realize it. We have speed dial classicists in our phones,
Yeah.
okay? And this is not to boast. We don't pretend to know all these things. We're on phone conversations
That's how we do our
with
work.
classics.
Yeah.
I'm going, all right, hey, Dennis McDonald, check this out, man. We're talking about Jesus and Dionysus. You know both worlds.
We do this all the
Here's
time.
what me and Neil were doing. We spend 30, 45 minutes.
And we get like quick little peer reviews for our own work,
Yeah.
just so we don't look like we're crazy.
No, hey, are we on the right track?
Like, look, they might not agree with what
They're
I'm saying.
always critical
They
about
might not.
something.
They might not agree with what I'm saying, but they'll say at least you're in the realm of possibility, and I'm cool with it. Like, all right, fine.
But then sometimes they're like, yes, I think you're on the right track. Paula, we talked to her, and she's into the Greek, and we're getting lost.
Yeah.
So, super powerful point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Let's finish this off.
All right. So, again,
we didn't even get to the good stuff yet.
we haven't even got to the good
So
stuff.
back to okay, we have an Epiphany. We have the birthday on January 6th, and it's tied to December 25th. He gets 13 days after the winter solstice.
Right.
And he uses the word Epiphany. Let's continue. We haven't even gotten to the good stuff yet.
We haven't even, and again, December 25th
Because
back here.
Dionysus is about to show up in the text.
So people who say Jesus was born on December 25th, which many Christians do, they're not wrong for recognizing a connection.
Right.
Even Christians did this. Don't call us.
But Dionysus is in this text.
Remember. Let's continue then.
Indirectly, but he's there. He's very clearly there.
Without a doubt. From the beginning of the increase of light, for a span of 13 days, for this also had to become a type of our Lord Jesus Christ. Here are those types and shadows, those
Here comes
prophecies.
the apologetics.
Okay.
Just like the calculation theory. Here he is doing his calculations. Right.
And his 12 disciples, fulfilling the number of the 13 days of light's increase, and many other things have happened and happen in support and testimony of this word, that is, of Christ's birth. For even the leaders of the idolatry religion, forced to confess a part of the truth, and the deceivers to deceive those convinced by them, idolaters, in many places conduct a great festival on that very night of the Epiphany, so that those hoping in the deception would not seek the truth. So it's happening on the same exact time.
Yeah.
First, in Alexandria, in the so-called Koreum, there is a great...
Hold on. Koreum. That's the house of the Kori.
Right.
Kori is the mother of the first incarnation of Dionysus. Kori is Persephone.
Right.
That's the baby Zagreus. That's why I said Dionysus, and that's not the only time there's another Dionysian reference in this text.
It gets even more explicit.
So Kori means like it could mean virgin in some context, but it literally means like young maiden.
We need to give context too, and just to say this, there were two mothers of Dionysus in the myth.
Yes.
Semele, who's the mortal mother,
is the second birth.
He's the second birth. But Kori, who's Persephone, is not just anybody. She is queen of the underworld.
That's why they're going into the Koreum.
This is why he has a catabasis and goes into the underworld just like Jesus and redeems the souls in the underworld, keys of Hades.
So you just heard Epiphanius say that the mother of Dionysus gives birth on January 6th. You just heard him say
January 6th.
Keep going.
Yeah, so, and they're celebrating in the Koreum, right?
In the Koreum.
Temple. All right. There is a great temple that is the precinct of Kori. For staying
Precinct of Kori, the mother of Dionysus. Where are the Bible scholars at? Where are they at?
They just probably don't.
Why are you and I finding this stuff?
I mean, why aren't we accepting?
Because they don't know that Kori is Dionysus' mother. They don't get taught
They don't know who Kori is and don't care.
They don't care who Kori is.
It's interesting because if they're connecting it back there, why aren't we listening to the ancient voices when they connect things?
Go ahead.
Even if we think that they might be stretching it.
No, this is evidence to me.
This is evidence.
This is one of the best sources that you're going to get. Is the Encyclopedius Epiphanius, who's in charge of the library.
Right.
Who is better than that?
Dude, it gets good, yeah. So it says, for staying awake the entire night with certain songs and flutes, singing to the idol, and spending the whole night after the crowing of the roosters. Makes me parallelomania in my mind a little here, but anyway.
Well, there's references to roosters in some of these Dionysian plays, too.
Yeah, got it. They descend with torches into a certain underground. Kori is kind of an underworld.
The Koreum is underground. Yeah.
Underground shrine, and bring out a certain wooded statue seated on a litter, naked, having a golden seal of a cross on the forehead, and two other such seals on each hand, and another two on the two knees, together with 5 seals made of gold. And they carry the statue around the middle temple 7 times with flutes and drums and hymns. And after celebrating, they again bring it down into the underground place. Being asked what this mystery is, they reply and say that at this hour today, the Kori, that is the Virgin.
The Virgin. They call Kori the Virgin. They call Dionysus' mother, Kori, a virgin in this story. But who does she give birth to in this story?
She gave birth to Aion.
Now, here's where the Dan McClellans and the Tim O'Neills will come in and go, that's not Dionysus, that's Aion. You lose. Wait a minute. Do you know who Aion is? According to all the contemporary sources of this time period, the middle and later Neoplatonist writers, the Pythagorean writers, Iamblichus, Proclus, Porphyry, Plotinus, they talk about Aion because Aion is a newer god. He rises around the same time as Christianity. He's sort of a contemporary figure. Who is he? Well, this is what they all say. And we have a Jarl Fossum, PhD, who wrote an article on it. I have a link in the description. He lists all the people that talk about Aion. The Byzantine Suda talks about Aion. Who is Aion? He is a synchronization of Osiris and Dionysus, who is reborn annually. Wow. A resurrecting version of Osiris / Dionysus. And then in the Suda, it connects him with Adonis as well.
Wow.
So these are the figures these are the normal, the usual suspects, as you will, of these sort of vegetation Dionysian gods. Adonis, Attis, and Attis is one of them as well.
Yeah.
But I really want to focus on Adonis, Osiris, and Dionysus. But specifically, the sources say that Aion, and according to Jarl Fossum, PhD, who's a classicist, that Aion is a Osiris hyphenated Dionysus synchronization from the late 1st, early 2nd to 3rd century, where his cult thrives. We have a giant mosaic. I'm showing on the screen right now. Beautiful mosaic dug up in Antioch, Syria, the city where Christianity first was called Christians, according to the book of Acts, Christianoi. The great Antioch, Syria, one of the big churches, Antioch, Syria, Rome, Alexandria, and Constantinople, the big four, right? Antioch's one of the big four. Well, what do they find in Antioch, Syria? A giant, beautiful mosaic from the 2nd century with Aion on there, sitting at a symposium with his disciples. And he look at his face, he has that Christ-like appearance of a prototypical, like Mithras, Jesus, the Apollo. Now they had that prototypical somber, very wise man look. He was wearing his Roman robes, Greek robes.
And that's a whole nother episode to describe how they changed these older myths into taming them in a philosophical way.
He looks like a philosopher.
Right.
But
this shouldn't shock anyone because Plutarch himself said Dionysus is Osiris in Greek.
Herodotus says that in the 5th century BCE. Right. So the merging of Dionysus and Osiris gives us Aion.
Right.
And it kind of helps with Jesus too.
I mean, dude, there's too many elements.
Before the Tim O'Neills jump in the chat and go, that's Aion, not Dionysus. First of all, Corey, if you find any myth of Corey giving birth to anybody, it's only Zagreus Dionysus.
Right.
This is the first time that Corey gave birth to anyone but Dionysus, because it is Dionysus.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to make sure I beat that horse down.
We know Liber, we know Bacchus, we know these are clearly names for him. So here you have a syncretic deity, Aion, being birthed by his first mother, which is underworld deity,
and then you also have Jesus with these Ionic life too.
Right. This is
Plutonius Aion.
So just to wrap up that quote, just so everyone knows.
No, it gets even crazier. There's another Dionysus coming up, right? Go ahead.
So they say gave birth to Aion. This also happens in Petra, the city, the metropolis of Arabia.
Where those stone, the famous Indiana Jones temple.
Yep. And then it says, which is Edom, written in the scriptures, in the idol temple there, and they praised the Virgin in Arabic dialect, calling her an Arabic Kabu.
Which I think might be connected to Kubli.
Okay.
Which in some traditions, she gives birth to Sabazius.
Interesting.
Which is the Asian Minor Dionysus.
Wow. So then it says
Sabazius Dionysus. Cicero says there are 5 Dionysuses. One of them is Sabazius from the east. So this is another Dionysus figure from Asia Minor, born from his mother's Kubli. And you got this goddess named Kubaba called the Virgin, giving birth to Dusares. Now, if you look up the scholarship on Dusares, what do they say? He's like an Eastern Arabian Dionysus.
Right.
So
we didn't get to the Dusares.
Finish the quote. Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. So he's getting ahead of himself, but either way, this is important. That is Corey, or the Virgin, and the one born from her, Dusares, that is the only begotten of the Lord.
Only begotten of the Lord.
This also takes place in Elousa, the city, on that night, as there in Petra and in Alexandria. You know how
he gave us 3 traditions there.
Yeah.
Apparently there's 3 different gods. He only mentions Dusares and Aion, but he mentions 3 cities. He mentions Alexandria, Elousa, and he mentions Petra.
Right.
And he's saying that these are different traditions. We found 8 different sources with 5 traditions in here connected to this date.
Yeah.
We're given a couple more by Epiphanius. This to me says that we're missing something about that. January 6th is not random.
No, it's not. There's so much to this because we're just talking about a day, and we're just talking about specific epiphanies of wine even, which we gave overwhelming, conclusive reasons to reconsider being so if you're being scholarly and not apologetic-wise, to reconsider not being so antagonistic to someone who might actually propose that there may be long-standing traditions being reconsecrated in the name of Christ.
Right.
So, like sacred spaces, temples turn to churches. Sacred practices, baptism, becomes only holy when your group does it.
Yeah.
Everything becomes Christianized.
By the way, Basilides, the guy who we mentioned is the first person to mention, according to Clement of Alexandria, the first people to celebrate the birthday on January 6th, Basilides. Who is Basilides? He's one of these Greek magical papyri style Christians who worships Abraxas. Abraxas is all over the PGM. He's very mystical. He's like the prototype of this type of Christianity that you find in the Greek magical papyri.
Yeah.
That's sort of Osirian, Dionysian Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And that's who celebrates him on January 6th. So I think the PGM type of Christians are the ones who started this whole birthday of Jesus thing.
I think you're there's so much more that we don't know in light of what we like to call Gnostic or the non-Orthodox Christians.
Yeah.
That
They're mixing and matching.
Bro, I would not be shocked one
Look at
bit.
the Nicene preacher.
It wouldn't shock me.
He says Christ is the fulfillment of the Eleusinian mysteries.
I wouldn't be shocked, exactly.
Or he says, I tell my disciples to go and watch the Phrygian mysteries of Attis, because we can find our mystery in their mystery.
See, I think there's
That's second
probably
century.
deeper roots to the origins where Christianity is not like, oh, we're just an authentic continuity of Judaism. I think it's an elbow that may actually be trying to be patched up by certain groups of Christians, that the earliest forms of Christians might actually be trying to shift Yahweh into a bad category again. This gets into the whole Yalaboth and Sabaoth and all these things. It would not shock me, bro, one bit, if they are really saying Christ, like you said, the Nazarenes, these are demonic mockeries. No, they're suggesting that Christ is the fulfillment of all of these traditions. Right. So rather than condemning them, they're actually saying, nah, bro, we're even greater than that because he fulfills all of the pagans. And you know what? Mad respect to those dudes. Yeah. Because, man,
that's a better approach.
That's even more optimistic. That's like saying, look, I can appreciate that. Oh, he did what? Guess what? Christ fulfilled that. I mean, how do you falsify it? You don't. But great. What you can do is say, you're not so us versus the world. You're saying, our dude actually accomplished and fulfills all of your stuff. And it's not demons and devils that did it. It's us saying, actually, we're thanks for the tradition that came from the Greeks and the Romans and the other myths and stuff. They helped us inspire, or really Christ is fulfilling them in a way we're all connected. It doesn't make divisiveness. That's what I'm saying. Like, imagine if Christians came along and could hear you, a Muslim, hear a Hindu talk about Krishna or whatever, and just go, you know what? I see Christ in that. I see Christ in that. You'd be like, you do what? No. Krishna? Man, I think God's working through Krishna. And I think God's working through Muhammad. I think God's... Bro, those are the Christians I'd be like, all right, man. You know what? You're bringing more peace. You're trying to bring unity. You're not trying to be divisive. You're not trying to say, oh, it's ours. You're going to go to hell. Get out of my face with that crap. I'm tired of it. You know what I mean?
So...
Sorry, I rambled there.
No, that was great. And I want to... First, I want to ask you, with all the data and all the messy evidence and primary sources that we discussed...
Yeah.
How do you get from all of that to Christmas being on December 25th? Right. What is your thoughts on this?
I think that you're dealing with winter solstice. You have Saturnalia, which he says Saturnalia was celebrated on January 6th.
He connects it that way.
But
by the way, he's not people who want to be confused about that. He's not wrong. Right. If you actually look at like Ovid, for example, Ovid discusses how Saturnalia would lead up to the winter solstice, and then Saturnalia would end, and then you automatically shift from Saturnalia to the Kalends of Janus festival.
Got it.
Which would lead you to the New Year,
right? And
then all the way to like the 3rd or 4th of the month, you still had everything closed. You were still in the festive season. Right. The holiday season of having Christmas and New Year's back to back like that was something the Romans did before Christianity was even around. It was Saturnalia and the Kalends of Janus back to back. It was the festive time of the year. That's why some of these sources, Martial is one of them, Catullus is one of them, some of these early Roman Latin sources, these poem writers, they don't even say Saturnalia. They just say December. It's because it's
everyone knew
because it's synonymous. The way we talk about December, oh, I can't wait till December, the festive season.
You already know what it is.
I didn't even say Christmas.
Yeah.
Because and I could have been talking about New Year's.
It makes me wonder.
It's all the same thing.
That's why I was going to say, like, I wonder if these days they didn't need to say Janus. You know,
no,
they're not dealing with.
It's December.
We know the special day, right?
It's the special time of the year, and there's nothing else like that. I've heard people. Tim O'Neill is one of these people who says, this is how you do any festival. No, that's not true. Gift giving, revelry, decorating in green and revelry, and putting wreaths up, and doing like a mock king thing where the king of Saturnalia would come out and you would pick a poor person and make him king for the day,
right.
Which you find in Christmas celebrations in Germany in late medieval. I'm talking like in the 15th century.
Right.
They're still doing this mock king thing. That's not, you don't do that for Valentine's Day. You don't do that for Easter.
Right.
You don't do that for a birthday. This only happens in January or in late December, where these specific things, gift giving, getting married, closing all the businesses down, decorating your house in greenery. This is only happening in December.
Right.
You don't do this. You don't do this for regular March festivals.
You're reminding me of the Golden Bow.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, I've heard this stupid apologetic played where they go, oh, gift giving and being merry and decorating, that's for any festival. It's not. It's just
this
not.
particular thing you're describing,
It's not.
right?
It's not true.
You asked me, what do I think?
December is the special month of the year, and it's been that way for centuries before Christianity took over.
This is the thing. If you go back to a documentary I did, that I'm actually talking about I'm dealing with Asherah, the origins of Asherah. We go back, way back, even before the Canaanite Athirat and stuff. You're going back into Mesopotamia and stuff like this. This goddess has this continuity, and she's attached to a tree, right? Well, you're looking at it from a histories of religion kind of point of view, and this would mean you do best. And we're like, okay, where does this go? And who does she connect to? And who does she influence later? Well, there's this tree, and then there's, in the Ark of the Covenant, there's this budded branch that's still in there that's probably associated with Asherah, side by side with Yahweh. And you know the Ark of the Covenant, its long history according to the biblical stories, and how it gets taken away. Well, then all of a sudden, the menorah shows up, and burning of the candles. And what is it? Its origins? Duh. It's dealing with a Maccabean revolt in the Hasmonean dynasty. It has zero earlier influences. Watch my documentary.
Wow.
Watch my documentary.
That's a little shout out right there.
Yeah.
So back to, I just want to give my thoughts on how this all played out. I think the calculation theory can still be legit with all this. All you have to do is you have a tradition of Jesus being crucified at this time of the year where the Passover was taking place. That's there. That's
you and me already have suspect that is purposeful anyway.
Yeah. But we can just say
even
that's
if you want a coincidence,
we can say that's a tradition from the Gospels.
Got it.
The
But
Gospels
I think that I wouldn't be shocked. I'm saying myself, as a person who thinks it's more likely there might have been a guy. Okay.
Yeah.
I still think they may have chose that date.
No. I think they could have been close enough. Like he could have.
Who knows?
It's possible.
Who knows?
Saying, let's
the
just
dude
say
died probably
it doesn't matter if it happened
on a cross.
It doesn't matter if it's true or not. All that matters is the tradition was there early.
Right.
We know. So there's an early tradition that he dies. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. All that matters is there's a tradition of him dying around the Passover.
Right.
But then these Basilidians who are drawing from other existing birth, this is very specific that these are epiphanies, as these articles in my description point out.
Yep.
These are epiphany festivals about the birth of Dionysus or Aion or Dusares, and this is sort of a tradition that's all over the Eastern Roman Empire. And a lot of people are celebrating this theory. Now, the Basilidians, who are the type of Christians to mix and match, like the Nazarenes are.
Right.
They're the type of mixed Eleusinian stuff or Phrygian stuff to Christianity. The type of stuff we find in the PGM, where Abraxas, Yao, Sabaoth is right next to Osiris. What the hell's going on there?
Yeah.
That's heresy. Well, maybe not. Maybe it wasn't heresy, okay? So the Basilidians they're following along with these traditions of mixing and matching, being like regular Norman people, not really caring about dogma that much, and just having fun with their spirituality. And they wind up celebrating
on January
6th, like these other people are doing for Dionysus. Right. Now all of a sudden you have a date, and what all needs to happen now is you need Christians later on in the 3rd century, Hippolytus, wink wink, where the calculation theory happens. Hippolytus comes along and tries to
justify the reason that day.
Not even justify the reason that day, but sort of tighten things up a little bit. Because the calculation theory proponents will point out that there was this Roman tradition of when somebody died, that it also meant that their death or their birth date was 9 months as a gestation period. Now, I push back on this.
Okay.
Because you can ask any of the scholars that say this and say, give me an example. Give me an example of a Roman. Augustus, Caesar, Mark Antony, Cleopatra.
Mm-hmm.
Did they? None of those people. We all know their birth dates and their death dates.
It's just some second century
very
thing?
Rare. It's very rare. I only know about maybe one or two where people go, well, he died on this day, so he probably was born 9 months before that.
Right.
It's not a... So if Hippolytus knew that this was some sort of tradition, it was to me, it's more of like an apologetic move.
Right.
Because it's not a common thing that people... I've heard people say, it was very common in this time period for Romans to say that if a person died, that they must have been born. That's not common. So
right.
I'm challenging, whether maybe Religion for Breakfast watches, give me 5 people. Give me a list of 5 people. You can find 5 people that match that. Then I might be a little more lenient, but I don't think that exists. I think it's a random, rare thing. It doesn't really exist as much as people say. It does exist, but it's not common. Now, the reason why I point that out is because someone like Hippolytus trying to tighten things up a little bit and distance themselves from any sort of idolatry, that's the move.
Yeah.
That is the move to get your cosmic Jesus Christ. The world was created on the day of Passover. That means Jesus died on the day of Passover, which means Jesus had to have been born with a gestation period 9 months. Boom. You're already close to 9 months anyway.
Well, so some of the Christians say he was born on the same day that he was also baptized and the wedding of Cana.
Yeah. All that stuff matches, but that tradition happens with Dionysus too.
Right.
Dionysus is born on the same day as his baptism. So that's what I'm saying. There's too much data to say that January 6th is random. That I think we beat that dead horse.
I want to go a little further.
But all I'm saying is this. You already have a January 6th tradition that I think is borrowing from the Dionysus tradition.
I agree.
And all you have to do at that point, if you're Hippolytus, is take that and tighten it up a little bit and distance yourself from that, but also to bring yourself into this whole cosmic Jesus, that it's all planned from the beginning, that he was going to be born on this day and 9 months later would be his death. It's all predetermined thing.
Yeah.
You're already close enough. So
this is a good point.
You see this with apologetics.
Right.
When something's already close enough, they will argue for it. The apologetics, that's what they do.
Unless it's against their ideas.
Like, think about it. Why wouldn't you do that if you're Hippolytus?
I get it. No, your point is really well put, because when I go back to think of some of these myths that we've pointed out about Dionysus, they give almost like a tale about it before, about he was leading them to this place. Like, they're already kind of giving you a reason why things happen at this place at the certain time, on the certain island, at the certain wine festival, whatever. There's probably some geographic location or reason behind why they would have constructed the story around these things as well. So I imagine there's several factors as to why Christians are now putting these calculations together. Again, like I was saying with the menorah, once you start looking into that, you go, hold on, but I thought it only originated here. It has a long earlier, really pagan, if you want to use the word pagan, non-monotheistic tradition that has been completely forced out of the typical Yahwist perspectives that were being taught in Judaism and such that are in the Hebrew Bible. I want to go a little further, though, because to nail down your point, one might go, okay, you really gave us a lot of stuff on the wine. I can agree, but is there any more? There's so much more about Dionysus that connects to the New Testament literature. Look, we have church fathers confessing, trying to distance themselves from this guy, crying, oh, madman Bacchus, trying to convert the guy.
Justin Martyr. We also have it from later church fathers. Nonus wrote a commentary on the Gospel of John.
Clearly.
And he used Dionysus to map onto the Gospel of John.
Right.
And so he was doing a comparison.
There's a 12th century medieval...
He's the same guy who wrote the Dionysica.
There's another 12th century poem. We don't know the author who wrote it. They do the same thing, except they changed the characters from Euripides Bacchae to Mary, John the Baptist, and Jesus.
Yep.
That's in my documentary.
And then you have Dennis MacDonald's work on the Mimesis.
This is the
Gospel
point.
of John, looking like it's following the tragedy type, where it's doing a mimesis of things that happen in the Bacchae.
No doubt.
I've seen other academics point out that Acts does this as well. Clement of Alexandria in his Protrepticus using Dionysian imagery to describe Jesus with.
No doubt.
And then last but not least, the story of Saint Demetrius, where there's a big church named after him, even to this day in the Orthodox Christianity, where there's a legend about Saint Demetrius, who was this poor farmer from Eleusis, and he was a devotee of his great goddess Demeter.
Yep.
And by the way, Eleusis is central to Dionysus. She's called Iacchus. Iacchus is what Dionysus is called. So Demeter and Dionysus are the only two gods that are called Iacchus. They're tied together in that sense. Demeter visits him in a dream and says, "Stop worrying about the Eleusinian mysteries. We're done. Our time is complete. Go follow Christ and take my mysteries to him."
Yeah.
Like what? They're co-opting the Eleusinian mysteries, which is a very Dionysian-centered religion.
It's almost similar to how Bible scholars will say when John the Baptist says, "Listen, I must decrease while he must increase."
It's like that.
As if John the Baptist himself really did nod to Jesus, so that the followers of John the Baptist...
It's the same situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something like that. So I just want to give I don't know if many people who are watching this, most people who watch you and me know the Bible. At least to some degree, they know it really well. They may not know the Greek sources that well, and I think that's what attracts many of them to come check us out. Well, let me give a quick little synopsis here of the Bacchae, because it's not just about wine and an epiphany. By the way, an epiphany is the manifestation, for those who don't know what an epiphany is, the manifestation, the presence of that deity, showing they're a god. That's important, because you can show up, and it's not an epiphany. It's an epiphany if you prove you're divine somehow. Well, in all three cases with Jesus, as they say, the birth, that's divine. The baptism is divine. We know about the dove coming down, right? There's miraculous sign there. And then, of course, the wedding at Cana. So the epiphany is a presence. We have a clear epiphany signal in one of those Dionysus stories where if you leave the presence of Dionysus, the wine turns back into water, okay? So evidence, right? But let's talk about the narrative tragedy you were just describing, right? The story of the Bacchae unfolds as follows. Dionysus, the god of wine, appears at the beginning of the play and introduces himself in the prologue. He calls himself the son of Zeus and explains why he has come to Thebes. "I have returned to Thebes, the land where I was born, and here I stand, a god in disguise, appearing as a man." We learn from his speech that Dionysus' father Zeus, making him divine, while his mother was the mortal Semele. He has returned to Thebes because his mortal relatives are spreading rumors about his mother lying about being impregnated by the god Zeus. In effect, they were denying his divinity, just like the Jews accused of Jesus in John 8:41. "We were not born of fornication," they said to Jesus. "Only his father, Cadmus, has honored his mother's tomb." So Dionysus decides to return home, strikes his aunts with madness, and reveals himself as the son of Zeus to everyone. Dionysus' main opponent in the story is his cousin Pentheus.
Yes.
The king of Thebes and is the grandson of Cadmus. Dionysus describes Pentheus as rebelling against the divine, a theomachai or theomachoi, because he refuses to worship him. When Pentheus appears on stage, he says that Dionysus is causing obscene disorder and insults Dionysus as a charlatan magician. The Jews literally say the same thing of Jesus, that you're casting out demons with Beelzebub, like you're a charlatan. And they are theomachoi. They're fighting against God so much that Gamaliel has to come out and say, brothers,
right,
if you fight this and it is God, you're going to find yourself fighting against God. There's the prison break, the release. There's so many things.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to hit you with, you hit me in the head with Attis that one time. Attis before a tree castrates, the same festivities that we see with the Romans. Well,
Yeah.
I want to hit you back one more time.
You
And
have you have the Christmas tradition in Dionysus, and then you have
Yep.
the Easter tradition for Attis.
I want to hit you with something even more in the vein of Dionysus to get your brain ticking and tell me what you think of this, Neil. I haven't mentioned this to you yet till now. Dionysus is coaching after escaping prison, just like Acts says Paul and Peter does. Coaches Pentheus and says, listen, dress up like a woman, which,
Right.
by the way, is embarrassing.
Right.
Okay? Dress in this woman's attire so they don't recognize
He
you.
wants him to be like a Maynard.
He wants him to be like a Maynard so they don't know that it's him. Climb the tree to get a better view. The Maenads notice him in the tree, and it doesn't say he gets down out of the tree and then they shred him like
Right.
a
His
wild
mom
animal
does it too.
in the tree.
His mother does it too. Agave. Because she gets possessed by Dionysus and she kills her own son.
Rips him apart like a wild animal.
Yeah.
And then they take his head back and she realizes what happens afterwards.
Right.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. Okay?
It's one of those things.
I am telling you,
then you know
bro.
what he says to them? You know what she says? She goes, she starts to realize who Dionysus is, and she repents. and he says to her, "It's too late.
It's
The hour's too late. You didn't
Yep.
believe me when it mattered."
right.
That's such a Jesus-y thing.
It is.
But it's not a Jesus thing. It's a
not.
Dionysus thing that Jesus is doing.
He's doing it, but he's more merciful, as Dennis MacDonald points out. That point about him dying in a tree, Jesus dies cursed in a tree. Okay,
On a tree.
On a tree. Both have him die on a tree. Both are humiliated in other clothing right there at their death. Dionysus has Pentheus wearing women's clothing, mocking him. He dies in a tree, and then the woman does something she doesn't realize she's doing, and she's regretting it.
And then he's also got the crown of thorns. It's like ivy, and the ivy is the life. He's got the berries flowing out, but Jesus is dead, so he's got just thorny crown. There's almost like some sort of reflection there.
It seems there's something going on with the story and tragedy of Dionysus with Euripides Bacchae and Pentheus, and his family rejects him. He came to his own, and his own received him not, just like Jesus. I mean, I am more and more persuaded we don't just have the evidence of the Epiphany and the January 6th thing. I think Christianity is deeply rooted in Dionysian tradition. So much so that this idea that they calculated independent, it seems more absurd the more I study it.
Well, it's interesting because the philosophers, which Christianity is drawing from the philosophy side, the Platonist, Pythagorean, all the gematria stuff, that's Pythagorean, the Logos, that's Pythagorean and Platonist. There's also Heraclitean philosophy of the Logos, once again. Heraclitus hated the Dionysian mysteries. Plato was drawing a lot from Heraclitus. Plato was also very critical of the religious order of the day. He dissed Homer and Hesiod, but it's almost like he was rewriting Dionysus. Plato talks about to be a philosopher is to be a Bacchus. Become a Bacchus, he would say, to be a good philosopher. So it's almost like Jesus is that philosophical Platonic version of Dionysus, becoming a Bacchus, like a philosopher, teaching parables, being like a cynic. That's why when people go, Jesus and Dionysus are like opposites, but not if you draw the philosophical avenue of Dionysus. Then you're almost right in step to step with Jesus.
He even is the Logos in Orphism.
Yeah.
So there's too much for me.
And he's born from the bosom of the Father, the lap of the Father.
He descends into Hades.
I was just reading some letters because I had this book that I just got where it's a collection of sources from the Hellenistic world. So the Ptolemaic letters, the Seleucid letters, the Attalid letters, the Antigonid letters. I have them all. And the Attalid dynasty is so fascinating. They worship a triad: Zeus, Sabazius, Dionysus, and Athena. Zeus, Sabazius.
There's a female.
Wait a
there's
minute,
two
I thought
males.
Dionysus was Sabazius.
Yeah.
They have the Father and Son are the same God.
This is something you
and
and me
then
were
they
talking
have
about.
a woman as this Holy Spirit goddess. And they call her Athena Sophia.
This is in the Orphic
They call her
hymns,
Athena
right?
Sophia.
Athena Sophia.
No, this is in the Attalid epistles.
Well, you and me.
These are just letters that people are writing back and forth. Hey, I went to the festival of Zeus Sabazius, and we honored his son Dionysus and Athena Sophia. Like that's just in these random letters.
Okay, because you and me looked in the Orphic hymns and we found something.
Yeah, this
to
isn't
the
mythology.
same.
This isn't mythology.
The correlation with the Father and the Son.
And by the way, this is the Attalids controlled Pergamon.
Okay.
This is a huge center for Christianity.
Yeah.
So they're drawing from the place that they're in. Like, how often do you draw from the city that you live in? Very often.
Definitely.
You don't draw from a different country in Hebrew and different language.
No.
You're going to draw from the language that you speak with the people that are around you. So when Christianity is being molded like a new thing
New
of
cult.
armor,
New cult.
yeah, when it's being molded in the fire, it's in Pergamum, it's in Alexandria, it's in Corinth, it's in Philippi, and it's drawing from the people around them.
Right. It has to imitate them. This is so 101.
Yeah.
People just don't, like the ones that are apologists, they irritate me,
No,
man.
people do get it, but
if
just
I'm
there's a lot of people that don't.
If I'm going to market in Buffalo, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Right now, I am going football. Okay, I'm going to have something to do with the Bills.
See, you're already successful.
I'm going to be successful.
Anyone watching this from Buffalo is going to say, Derek, you got that right.
Okay, so this is a point, right? Like, how do you get these cults? How do you get the members to come in? You look, walk, talk, act like those people you may give a spinoff, you may make sure it's kosher for your in-group, but it's got to look like it, or they don't give a shit.
John Kloppenborg's book points this out, that the Dionysiac groups and the Christian groups, they're doing the same type of system, just worshiping different gods. But they operate in the same way, like modern day trade unions would.
For sure.
Yeah.
Dude, you and me with our Phrygian caps just brought the muse.
Phrygian cap, baby.
We hit you hard with it.
It came from the East.
Calculation theory for me is it's almost like I would expect any group to calculate or rationalize to explain their origin.
It's an apologetic, I think.
Yeah, and that's fine.
And I'm not doubting that it happened. I'm just saying it's so late in the game that to sit there and think that's the first thing they did to find Jesus' birthday. Even Nothat doesn't even say that.
Right.
The famous guy who wrote the article about the calculation theory.
Okay.
The one that Andrew cites in his videos.
Okay.
The one that I always talk about this guy because it's so funny. He makes me laugh at how ignorant it is. Tim O'Neill, when we were having a back and forth in this conversation for a few days, felt like back and forth. You're wrong. No, Christmas is perfectly on its own category. They're in a bubble. And then he tags this dude who wrote this article about the calculation theory, Nothaft.
Okay.
And Nothaft shows up in the chat, and I start talking to him. And I start telling him what I think. And he goes, I agree with you 100%. I think there's truth to both of it. He goes, I think the calculation theory happened. I just don't think that they did draw. There's no way they didn't draw from the culture. That's nonsense. And what does Tim say? I think the same thing. Then what the fuck are we arguing about?
Right.
Why did we just have a 3-day argument when now you're saying you agree with me? Well, I didn't think you said it that way.
Well, what do you think? Let me switch it back. I know this was an interview where you and me, we have such deep conversations.
It's just funny how people will only go as far. Some people don't want to look at the evidence and the arguments. They just want to know, did an expert think does an expert agree with him?
Right.
Which is fine. If you don't want to do the work, fine, be like that. It's better than just agreeing with anyone on the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a healthier mindset.
I'll go with the PhD.
But if somebody's doing the work and they have arguments and they have evidence, don't just shut it down because your favorite PhD didn't say that.
That's what gets me and you into trouble. I think what happens is we have a plethora of PhDs who don't agree with PhDs. And so we are persuaded by certain PhDs that aren't other PhDs. And therefore, when we get our good friends who go, I don't agree with you, what's wrong with you? And we go, XYZ, PhD, who is support and back
and then instead of listening to the argument, they go, Does Bart Ehrman agree? Does Dan McClellan? I don't know if I believe that.
Yeah, there's a cult kind of personality.
It's not even. It's just like they don't have the confidence to know if the argument even makes sense. Well, they're not like, they don't have the, and I'm only talking about a few people. I'm not talking about everyone. I'm only talking about a few people.
Yeah.
But they lack the basic knowledge of this topic to even measure the arguments that we're putting out there. They have to get it. There are certain scholars that I've noticed who just kind of repeat the status quo, and they just want to know what the correct answer is. They don't really want to look into why scholars
or even
say
buck against what may be the consensus on something.
Yeah.
So,
but anyway, I don't want to get too much into that.
No. I want to throw this back at you. This was on my heart here toward the end.
Yeah.
Since the muse is tugging me right now, the muse of the spirit of the muse. And that is, now that we know about January 6th, now that you and I have realized that this is not a random date, and we're hoping that the scholars get it, I don't care to ask you what your thoughts are or what you think they might do. My question is, what do you think this does for implications of Christmas? And do you think this really seals the deal on how we've been approaching this whole issue, like in terms of pagan influences? Well,
I think that Christianity, being that there's still millions of Christians alive today, something like this is not going to catch on. Yeah, there's going to be pushback. Even academics who aren't Christians are going to, in my opinion, this has been my experience, and I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, but
it's been my experience that the sort of pushing, the polarization, the force of popular opinion sort of weighs down on people, and they sort of go along with the more popular approach, and they sort of look for reasons to find that to be true. It seems like.
Okay, so
I'm guessing that what we're saying right now is not going to spread like wildfire.
Okay, let me push
There's
this
gonna be a
here.
lot of pushback
Scholars
on it.
want methodological
Methodology.
solid connections. I can't prove there's no Christian source that says I took from the January the 6th tradition of Dionysus. But when you see the literary components,
Epiphanius is pretty damn close to that.
yeah, he's freaking
He's
close.
almost damn near says that.
He does. He says that the same thing they celebrate.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
celebrate same day of the Christ, but he rationalizes it with the 12
That's a late
disciples.
source, but Augustine's not a late source. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever. Like, I guess here I am saying New Testament literature clearly has indications of Euripides, the Epiphanies that we're finding with the birth.
Yeah, you
and all
take
this.
this all.
All
This is
this
a big
in.
thing. You can't just take this one thing at
No.
When you take it all as one big tradition, you go, whoa! Now you're seeing it.
Yeah.
And what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying to take a step back and like look for all the things that match this. All I'm saying is take the evidence as in like the tradition about all these wine miracles happening with Dionysus in specific cities, Elis, Teos, Naxos, Andros, the idea of him being a child or there being a Theodosia, those specific words that show up in these various traditions that line up, and then you give a date thrown in there, and one of these that lines up at January 6th.
Exactly.
And then you look at Christianity and go, they also celebrate specific things on the same day. Wine miracle, wedding at Cana, the Epiphany of Christ, the birth of Christ, and the baptism of Christ. All the same things that happen to Dionysus that are celebrated on the same day.
But
to me, this screams this needs to be looked at.
I am so on the same page. We can't prove without a shadow of a doubt.
But there's so much data that's screaming at you right now.
And the fact that these celebrations, which we've nailed to a date that's exclusively mentioned by Pliny the Elder, is taking place in all sorts of regions. And then you get Epiphanius talking about them celebrating this day in all these other regions in the south and near Egypt, like in Egypt, really. All these places in these celebrations, like we said, it makes me really go like, guys, how come this hasn't been put on the table sooner as far as nailing down this celebration? Maybe there has. Maybe I need to look at Rudolf Bultmann closer, but I know that...
He gets into it a little bit, but I don't...
Bultmann.
This is why I suggested that you and I need to actually get this through peer review in an article, which we are planning on doing, because it's never been articulated fully that there's a connection between these two dates, January 6th. They've only pointed out the miracles in common. They pointed out the Epiphany in common. They pointed out, there are some people who point out the dates too, but there's never been all of it.
Yeah, so if we
no one's ever put it all together yet.
Let's try to compile this. I hope the viewers enjoyed this stuff because this has been deep and there's much more we couldn't get into about stories of Dionysus that just nail down his significance with this. I think you and me, we're going to have to compile this stuff. We're going to really have to try and do our best to say, here's why it seems the overwhelming evidence is they're just reconsecrating a sacred day and making it Christianized.
Look, even if it's just something on the table, that should be taken seriously going forward.
Yeah.
Like, and that, to me, this doesn't take it away from Christmas. This adds to it. This gives people a better reason to go, wow, this is a special day.
When you first heard that December 25th was pagan, did it turn you off or did it go, you mean it's cool. Even older and even deeper?
I started looking at those wreaths and going, no, that makes sense why we had those things.
You know what I'll tell you happened to me? I thought, oh my gosh, this goes way back into our ancient past, to our ancestors, even deeper, to where they looked at the stars and the sun and the moon, and they had to connect these dots in agricultural ways to know when to plant, when to crop, when to reap.
I thought it was prophetic.
Pretty deep.
Yeah. Well, you have just attained true gnosis.